You are now tuned into the truth frequency.
We are TFR. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
But he that giveth his mind to the law of the Most High, and is occupied in the meditation thereof, will seek out the wisdom of all the ancient, and be occupied in prophecies. He will keep the sayings of the renowned men, and where subtle parables are, he will be there also. He will seek out the secrets of grave sentences, and be conversant in dark parables. He shall serve among great men, and appear before princes. He will travel through strange countries, for he hath tried the good and the evil among men. And he will give his heart to resort early to the Lord that made him, and will pray before the Most High, and will open his mouth in prayer, and make supplication for his sins. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. And I thank all of you for taking the time again to join us this evening. I have a special guest with me this evening, Robert Ferrell. Robert, are you there, brother?
Here, how you doing?
Excellent, brother. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Many of you might be aware of Robert's work on YouTube. He broadcasts under apocrypha 1970. Is that correct, Robert?
Yes, that's right.
All right. Well, if you would, brother, give out all of your contact, website, YouTube information, wherever, and also talk a little bit about your book, The Super Gospel, and where people can find it as well.
Okay, well, let's see. I like to keep it simple. I got about two things going on. I got my YouTube channel that I have. Again, it's Apocryphile 1970, APOCRYPHILE 1970. And also, I have a website, which is run by a friend of mine named Rick Simpson, called scriptural-truth.com. Got to put in the dash. Excellent website, full of all kinds of links, full of all kinds of PDFs. And there you can actually get, for free, a PDF of the Super Gospel if you so desire. What it is and where you can get it. It is a compilation of early Christian material that is basically just a gospel harmony, a synthesis of all of the ancient Christian material that basically I could get my hands on at the time of writing it, basically to illustrate in a kind of a linear way the basic ideas that were handed down to us from ancient Christianity, the early Christian church. In other words, a synthesis of all of the Christian material, basically a gospel harmony. That is available through Amazon as well as through Fifth Estate Publishing, which is run by Joseph Lumpkin, another friend of mine. But basically, the importance of that book, for what it's worth, is to illustrate that there is a compatibility of these ancient texts, and there are literally, I don't know that I have an exact count, but it's got to be close to 100 different sources that go into that book. So it's not just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It is the Proto-Evangelion. It is the birth of Mary. It is what's left to us of the Gospel of the Hebrews and the Gospel of Thomas and a whole bunch of other things. As long as they fit into kind of the narrative structure and, are kind of a gospel per se, that was included in the compilation of this book, which again, you can get a PDF version free from scriptural-truth.com. But that was one of the many sort of kinds of things that I put together basically for my own information, for my own satisfaction. I kind of get very curious about a lot of different things, Bible being a big a huge thing that I'm interested in, and I wanted to kind of know the answers for myself. Did you know how would you know if something was true or not? How would you know if something fit or not? Unless you took the time to actually line them up and put them together. I thought, to me, that was like a great proof, if you will, of their intercompatibility with one another. Would be at least a sign of the inspiration of these works.
Yeah, I've read it and I highly recommend it, and I do pass it off to people because I think it's one of the most succinct when it comes to the gospel narrative with regard to the life of Christ. Because in the canon we have one story of the early childhood of Yeshua, and when he had left his parents and they found him later in the temple when he was 12, 13 years old, teaching the patriarchs there. I mean the priests, the rabbis that were there at the temple, and they were amazed at his knowledge. But what people don't realize and don't understand, because they don't read a lot of the extra biblical materials, is that even during the childhood, the early childhood of Christ, Joseph and Mary were unable to find a teacher for him, and nobody was willing to take him on because he basically was smarter and more knowledgeable about the Aleph Bet and anything else that they wanted to teach him on. And he made the teachers feel foolish. And they were being taught by him, even with him being, early childhood age. And it shows that in studying even the infancy narratives and the early gospel, the protevangelium, and other stories, which were written by his half brothers, Didymus Thomas and James, the first bishop of the Jerusalem church. They were near the same age as him, being his stepbrothers from Joseph's former marriage, being an elderly man, a widowed man. He had children from a previous marriage, who Mary basically becoming her caretaker and guardian. She took them on as her own children and raised them also with Christ, along with Salome, who became the caretaker of Yeshua during his whole life, and the cousin of Mary. She basically hung out with him and Mary and Joseph the entire life of Christ, and it was even one of the women that was there at the cross when he was crucified. And so these are stories that a lot of people don't know about, that which you have incorporated also into the super gospel. And so for people that want to know the fullness of the story, and it should, and I believe that you begin the narrative with Mary, which, the story of Mary is completely unique as well. Hannah and Joachim, and how they, like Abraham and Sarah, were barren for a long time until they were blessed to have a child, Mary in this case, and dedicated her to the temple at 3 years of age. She grew up in the temple until she was 14 years of age, and that was the time when most of the virgins left, and then they were betrothed to Mary later in life. But Mary refused to become married and wanted to remain a virgin her whole life. And then so they decided to bring forth the elders of the different tribes, and Joseph was chosen in supernatural means. Basically, a rose budded from the top of his staff, and a dove landed upon it, showing that he should be the caretaker. And he was a elderly widowed man and wanted nothing to do with a young girl, but he was chosen and accepted his calling. And then, when he came home 6 months later and found her pregnant, he was just horrified and wanted to kind of put her away secretly. But the spirit, Gabriel, came to him, told him that she was supernaturally impregnated, and that she had never been with a man. And there was a trial, and they, it was found that both of them were innocent of the charges brought up against them. And that's when, Christ, of course, came forth in supernatural manner and Mary was found to be a virgin. And I do believe you incorporate all these stories into your book. And so, again, I do highly recommend it. And Robert is one like myself that loves to read and study everything in order to get a full context on what is the jigsaw puzzle of truth. And so, I highly respect you, brother. I consider you to be one of the foremost researchers with regard to the extra biblical text, and a man after my own heart, which is why I opened with the passage tonight from Baruch chapter 39. I mean, not Baruch, the wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach, also known as Ecclesiasticus, in the apocryphal text. But anyways, so can you talk a little bit about how long it took you to do that study? Because as you said, there are a number of texts which not a lot of people have heard about. And if they do read your narrative, I believe not only will they be greatly blessed, but they will be introduced to a lot of texts which most people have never heard about. And so can you talk a little bit about your interest in the extra biblical materials, what prompted you to study all that, and then what it was that led you to basically compile this information for yourself, which then turned into the super gospel?
Okay. Well, I guess the thing about it is I've always sort of had kind of an obsessive personality. I'm the kind of person who, if something sticks out in my mind, I tend to just try to get to the bottom of it, try to figure it out. I've always kind of been that way, and it, with a number of subjects. But long story short, I didn't start out raised as a Christian or somebody who grew up in the church or even around people who were in the church. I kind of grew up, I would say, in a semi-hostile, I guess, environment where, there wasn't outright hostility towards Christians or whatever, but just kind of it wasn't like I was raised to, think and whatever, to know all the stuff that they knew. And then I wasn't familiar with all the stuff that they knew and everything. And it just wasn't part of my family or anything really growing up. The few times I ever went to church, well, it was kind of, reluctantly and just because I had to, I guess I should say. But, things in life sort of started pulling me towards the knowledge that there was a God, certain things that probably would only make sense to me, but things like coincidences and, synchronicities and that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people can relate because when I talk to people, it's a lot of times it's the very same thing. It's like God is kind of like whispering to you, hey, listen, I'm calling you, I'm talking to you here. I want you to listen to me. I want you to come to me, and so that kind of happened to me. After a while, I got to the point where the coincidences that were happening to me and the synchronicities and they were really causing me to question my agnosticism, my atheism that I had at the time. And so it just so happened one of the synchronicities, quote unquote, one of the coincidences, if you will, was that I happened to be working with this person who was a Baptist minister at the time. He just was working the same basically menial job as I was working at the time. And he started talking to me about the Bible, and one thing kind of led to another, and it was just one of those right place, right time kind of things. And so I went to his house, said the sinner's prayer at the time, and I literally felt like a different person. It was such an overpowering kind of experience for me at the time, and just as a neophyte, as a person who was just recently come around and just felt that entire shift, if you will, from worldly thinking to spiritual thinking, kind of the first steps, I guess, along the way. And I started reading the Bible in earnest because, of course, naturally, if that's the truth and it's God's word, you're definitely going to start going down that path. And and I started reading the Bible from beginning to end because it's probably not the way that most people would do it, but being that was just kind of the way I was thinking at the time. You start at the beginning, you read to the end. And so that's what I did. It took me probably about 6 months to get through it. But one of the things I started noticing along the way was mention, if you will, of extra canonical books. I had heard really only one time before about there being diverse canons, different canons. And that was back when I was in college. One of my roommates happened to be Catholic. And, at the time, I was the kind of person who was, ready to argue with people about, the existence of God. And I started thumbing through his Bible because I didn't happen to have one. And I noticed at the beginning of, at the table of contents, there were all these other books I'd never heard about. And I asked him, I said, I've never heard of any of these books. The few times I went to church, I probably would say I was bored and I would just sort of thumb through and look at this and that and the other. And that was really all I knew. But, I had been through the table of contents and I certainly was aware of books that I, like Sirach, Wisdom, Maccabees, Tobit. These are all books I'd never heard of before. And so I asked him, I said, well, what are all these things? I never heard of these books, right? And he just was very matter of fact about it. He's like, oh, yeah, I'm Catholic. We have more books. And it sort of blew my mind at the time. Of course, I wasn't ready to convert back then. But as I was reading the Bible and I started coming across books of Jashar and, other books that are mentioned, Edo, throughout the Old Testament. And, I started kind of poking around, looking at encyclopedias and whatever, because this was before the internet, what some of these books were. And, some of them were lost and some of them remain to us, such as Jasher. So I started kind of having this passing awareness of what these books were. And it kind of bothered me in a way, that there would be mention of books that you're basically told to go reference, like, hey, if you want to read more about it, you can go read it in this book or that, so it was kind of like, well, they could do that, but we can't do that. We don't have these books anymore, and it kind of bothered me that we hadn't held on to them. So that was kind of sticking in my craw. And then when I got all the way down to the book of Jude, and there was the quote by Enoch, and I was reading a King James version, one that's got the concordance sort of built in. So it directed me back to Genesis, where, I looked for that quote by Enoch, that the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment. So, and it didn't quite say that. And, I puzzled about that because, again, it was like I was saying before, usually if something sticks out in my mind, I can't let it go. And so I started looking around from Bible to Bible to Bible, and researching it. And one of the things it didn't tell me, and that it puzzled me, it didn't tell me that this came from an apocryphal book. I had to go through several different translations before I found one that just matter-of-factly cited from the non-canonical book of Enoch 1:9. So that just threw me for a loop, because really for two reasons. Number one, the very fact that this book wasn't included in the canon, but also this sort of, how shall I say, the way in which the other translations that I had looked at had kind of given me a red herring. That really stuck in my craw as well, because why would it be directing me back to Genesis if it was common knowledge that this was a non-canonical book, if you will, that was known and that still existed? I mean, they gave you chapter and verse. You could just go and find it and read it, and there it was. And Jude had prefaced it by saying, Enoch, citing the source, the seventh from Adam, giving him his antiquity, stating that it was that Enoch, prophesied of these men, saying, behold, the Lord cometh and all. But, I'm saying it threw me for a loop that I thought that people were kind of, for lack of a better term, lying about it, covering it up, making it something that, was sort of academic, but not mainstream, not something that your average Christian would know. And so it kind of got me a little bit soured on the church as it was. And this is not me getting on Christians in general or whatever. I felt like, that this was an institutional issue. that people were giving you misdirects. And the very fact that a Christian would, in effect, lie by means of omission or lie by means of a misdirect really kind of soured my opinion of Christian scholarship, Christian tradition, the notion of the canon, and all kinds of things. Just sort of, it just dawned on me that everything that I had kind of been led to believe, and I had only been a Christian, for maybe 6 months by then, before it really hit me that that's what was going on, that there was all this leftover stuff, or the stuff that was taken out or never included that probably should have been or could have been. And that even the knowledge of this stuff, just like it would be one thing to have this set of books over here and say, this is what we believe, but these books are also referenced. That would at least be a step towards honesty, and I wasn't finding that a lot in Christendom. There wasn't that tendency to be honest. And getting back to, for example, the super gospel, which by super I don't mean like it's better than, it's just kind of like the greater context, if you will, of the gospel, super in that sense, that it, beyond the borders, if you will, of the canon, that kind of connotation. That was my intention in naming it that. When you look back on ancient church iconography, ancient church art, for example, one of the things you'll find, especially in Orthodox churches, you'll find that there's a lot of ancient iconography depicting things such as, for example, the trial of Joseph and Mary, Mary in the temple, Jesus being born in a cave, the symbolism of the ox and the donkey. There's so many different things that you'll read in all of this extra canonical material that was and is really part of ancient Christian traditions. So this isn't really out in left field. This is ancient stuff. These books are attested to, if you will, from the very beginning. And it's really only later that these books begin to fall out of favor when church leadership and so on tend to drift away from these traditions and more towards the 27 books of the New Testament as being the canonical. But again, that was something that took a long time really to crystallize. If you will, hundreds of years. People give various time frames. It's kind of unknown, but there were lots of books: the Shepherd of Hermas, the Epistle of Barnabas, Clement, all kinds of contenders, if you will, that are bound, if you will, in ancient manuscripts. Codex Sinaiticus, for example, I believe contains the Shepherd of Hermas and Barnabas. And so on. There are manuscripts that exist that imply that more than just our 27 books that we have now were accepted as inspired. And so when people kind of give you this cut and dried sort of, everything's all nice and neat and, it's not really that clean. It's not as they say. It's a little fuzzy. And so all of this kind of led me to a lot of other kinds of issues, such as, well, okay, if there were all these books and it was a little bit nebulous, a little bit uncertain as to which ones were in and which ones were out or whatever, there's the question of how would you know? And what would be your criteria? And I guess as soon as I started asking myself those kinds of questions, strangely, things started kind of occurring to me. I'm not sure quite how to put it, but I started seeing patterns that, like if you let yourself think that way and you're open to these kinds of thoughts, that things will come to you. And I started seeing patterns in terms of language and in terms of sometimes an author will kind of hint at something or beat around the bush about something such that if you're open to it, you'll catch it, and if you're not, you might not. For example, the quote from Jude, the quote of Enoch. I like to start with that one because that one is very much spelled out. It's very much in your face, if you will, and it's a really good place to start because it's so very solid. I mean, you're talking about Jude, for example, who says outright that he's a brother of James, and of course, James and Jude were both, if you will, brothers of Jesus.
Right.
You would think, okay, they lived in his house, they ate together, no doubt, they knew one another. I mean, all of us who've had brothers and sisters and whatnot, and we all know what it's like. You're in the home environment, and you kind of know each other. You know, the real, true person that
Intimate.
you are. I mean, you can't help but know that. I mean, you're in close quarters with these people.
And hold on, Robert. Hold on. We'll be right back, everyone. All right. Welcome back, everybody, for second portion. Robert, I want to give you a chance to finish up what you were saying, brother, and then I'll make an announcement about the Great Commission trilogy that I just released as well.
Okay. Well, really what I was really just driving at for all this is that there's all kinds of evidence, be it through iconography, pictures, traditions, or whatever, about the accounts of these ancient accounts. And there are tons and tons, not just the Jude quote, but there's tons and tons of references to these extra canonical books, if you will, throughout the scriptures, which you can find lists on the internet, but they're vast. And like I said, they tend to sort of they tend to sort of be sort of self-aware. Like, for example, if you go read the book of Hebrews, chapter 11 of the book of faith, right? It talks about faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, and so on and so forth. And it goes on and talks about the subject of faith. And within that chapter, for example, there are at least 2 references to extra canonical books. There is the reference to the woman of Second Maccabees who was going to have her children killed and that she would have them received back to her, and also there is, yeah, and then there's the reference to the prophets being sawn in two, which is from the martyrdom of Isaiah.
Yeah, the ascension of Isaiah.
And exactly, and so when you look at the context, why is this in the book of faith? Is there a hint? You know, is there some reason why you can't get all the way through the book of faith, or the chapter of faith, if you will, without denying, at least on some level, what you're reading? You know, is there something that we're doing that is stifling the Holy Spirit in making these canonical decisions and following these canonical boundaries? Because these are really, really great questions. Another classic book through in the New Testament, the Epistle of James. They sometimes call it the Proverbs of the New Testament, but it would probably be much more likely or much more fitting to call it the Sirach or the Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiasticus, if you will, of the New Testament, because there's so many references to the Ecclesiasticus, so many references to the wisdom of Solomon, or even when Paul talks about the armor of God. A lot of that can be pieced together from the Old Testament, but it most closely resembles the description that is in the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 5. And so, you know, the idea about faith and believing and all that, if you're able to read between the lines, that's what I'm getting at as far as it being kind of subtle. It is there, but you have to be open to it. The minute you recognize that the citations here, some of these are very foundational too, as far as Christianity and our entire Christian heritage and tradition. They're very solidly grounded in references to these extra canonical books. And so it can't be for no reason. It can't. A person of faith, a person who takes God at his word. It can't set well with someone to know these things, and to go on as if they weren't there. And so that's kind of the underlying, if you will, thing that keeps me going on this particular subject. There's things that are way beyond that. I mean, as far as interpretational and stuff, I won't get into all that. But I mean, as far as it being solidly grounded on the scriptures that we accept, it is through the acceptance of those scriptures that you do accept, that you are honestly compelled to believe, or to at the very least take a very serious look at what these sources are. Why are they being cited, and what are they trying to say? It's like God is dropping us hints, like, here it is in the book of faith. You really need to believe what I'm telling you. Here it is in a wisdom book, if you will. You really need to take this wisdom to heart. Slow to speak, quick to hear, that kind of thing. What are you being told? To what are the instructions that are really being given to you? You can let man determine that for you, or you can let the Spirit guide you into those truths, because these are things that you pick up through spiritual insight, and they can only be understood. I mean, yeah, they can be paraded out. Like, I could show you what they are and what they mean, but you would never arrive at that conclusion unless you believed first, and you stopped on these things and actually looked at them. And for some reason, the church has been very persistent about dodging these issues, about dancing around these references and kind of pretending like they don't exist, like you don't ever hear about them to begin with. And then if you finally should happen to hear about it or come across it or whatever and start asking questions, then there's all these little pat answers that they always seem to have about, just why they're not included and so on and so forth. But as far as answering the questions, they really don't. So there's really something fundamentally wrong with church tradition as we now have it. And a person with the true spiritual insight and who hungers and thirsts after truth won't be satisfied, I don't think, after knowing this, with pat answers and just tired old traditions, if you will, that really aren't grounded in the actual text.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I do believe that, the church authorities, in my opinion, and those that have become the heads, because the Levitical priesthood was usurped by those that had lied to Joshua when they went into the land of Canaan. They pretended to be people from far away. They were the children of Cain, specifically the Canaanites, which had usurped the land from Shem. But the princes and Joshua decided not to kill them, made them servants unto the scribes, and they became the usurpers of the Levitical priesthood, and they were the ones that became the Pharisees and the Sadducees during Christ's time, that he referenced as the murderers of the prophets, saying that their fathers had been the killers of all of the prophets from Abel to Zacharias. His cousin John the Baptist's father, Zacharias, who was murdered in the Holy of Holies. And so, and these kind of things were passed down in tradition. And those that became what is now the Roman Catholic Church and the Constantinian councils, which decided on the canon, in my opinion, those things were done and historically have always been done in order to keep truth from the people and to keep the masses in ignorance. That's one of the reasons why they fought so hard to keep the Holy Bible from being printed in other languages and dominated it through the priesthood, and that anybody that wanted to study or know about the word had to attend church and pay their tithes and bow before a priesthood and use them as intercessory in order to come to understanding on the faith. And so these things have always been controlled, and there's particular reason for it. And even in this day and age, the indoctrination is so strong and so encoded into the matrix of control that we're all born into, and that everybody now, the prison has been instituted into their minds, and so many people are afraid to step out of their little box, out of their four-walled room, in order to look out the windows or to step outside and seek something new and open themselves to new possibility. It's so crazy, how everybody has locked themselves away to the indoctrination that they were born into, and that they're so afraid to step out of it, and how so many people judge all of this material, all these extra biblical books, without ever having read them. And during the time of the early church, as is shown in the even the canonical material, there's references to many other books, 22 of which we don't are specifically named and mentioned in the Bible, like the book of Jasher twice, that we no longer have access to. And so there are many, many books which have been extirpated, disappeared, and taken away from perusal by the masses. And who knows how many are in the Vatican Library, and that are being secretly housed in vaults somewhere in different monasteries and different synagogues or whatever. I mean, I'm sure there's probably 70, 80% more material, and I'm talking about from the thousands that we do have available to us, that are now coming to light. But that the early church, there was no canon, there was no authorized compilation, there was no structure to. People studied and read everything that they could, and the books were being handwritten at that time, and so people really cherished the material, revered whatever they could, and shared it in whatever capacity that they could as well. I mean, it's amazing. It reminds me of, there was a church in Russia during the communist era that was an underground church, and they did not have access to the word as we do here. And the pastor or the preacher there, he had one page of a chapter from Jonah, and basically read from it every time the church came together, and spoke about how Jonah was the forerunner for Messiah, and how it tied together with the sign, that he was the sign as far as the coming of the Savior Messiah, how he would be 3 days in the belly of the whale, and how Christ would be 3 days in the heart of darkness in Sheol, and that he was a forerunner for, all of that, the harbinger. I mean, and it's amazing, but with just that one page of text, he was able to form a church and to create an assembly of believers around him. I mean, that's how powerful the word is. And here we have the internet and have access to all these hundreds and even thousands of texts, which most people don't even take the time to read, have no interest in even looking at or examining. I mean, just the whole thing that we brought up with the super gospel, how there's so many that worship Christ and are disciples unto him, myself included, and yet nobody mostly does not even know anything about his early life. There's only one story, as we said, in the canon about his early childhood, and why people wouldn't want to know everything that they could, and especially from those that knew him best, that grew up with him as family, that spent every day eating meals, breaking bread, sharing conversation, just gathering memories with him, and that became his disciples. I mean, and these are those that Didymus Thomas, his half brother, who was called his twin, because he looked like him. It was of the same age. And James, who was also the younger brother of Christ and knew him best and wrote the Predevangelium of James. I mean, these are stories about his childhood and even that of Mary. And people know nothing about these. And just to illustrate my point a little more, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you, Robert. And I want to get into a couple themes as well that are little known about by mainstream churchianity. I did release a 3-book set called the Great Commission, which is about the Acts and the Apostles. I mean, the Gospels of the Apostles, which I know you know a lot about these books. You've read a lot about them. Also, for those that don't know, Robert narrates many of these extra biblical texts online and has a huge following on YouTube. He's got millions of views and thousands of subscribers. And so you can go and listen to him read even the book of Enoch in its entirety. I believe that one video alone has over 1 million views, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly. But and so I just want to share, really quickly, the book of Acts. In the canon, we have one book of Acts, which speaks about the mission of Paul and Peter and Silas and a couple of other prophets, patriarchs and the apostles. But there were 12 that were recognized as the major apostles and 70 that were recognized as the minor apostles. And they are spoken about in many books, and yet nobody knows about their story and what they had to encounter and overcome. And so for that reason, I put together these. There's so many texts, it took me 3 full books, and there were still others that I didn't include. But really quickly, I want to read the names of some of these just to let people know about what they are missing out on if they have not looked into and have not studied these other things. And in this case, it gives you a better understanding as to the church formation and how it came together and how the gospel was spread by the apostles as they went out 2 by 2 to different parts of the world, and the kind of things that they encountered coming up against the pagan church and Satan and the powers, the principalities, the rulers of darkness. In the first book, the Great Commission, I have these texts included: the Acts of Paul and Thecla, the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel according to Mary, the Acts of Peter and Paul, the Gospel of Thomas, the Acts of Thomas, the Acts of Thaddeus, the Acts of Andrew, the Acts of Xanthippe and Polyxena, the Acts of John, the Acts of Perpetua and Felicitas, the Acts of Philip, an addition to the Acts of Philip, and the Acts of Barnabas. And as I said, many of these were of the major apostles, but yet these texts are little known about and even less read and understood. In the second Great Commission book, I have these: the Gospel of Nicodemus, the Gospel of Bartholomew, the narrative of Joseph of Arimathea, the doctrine of Addai, the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, the Acts of Barnabas, the Acts of Bartholomew, the Acts and Martyrdom of St. Matthew the Apostle, the Vision of Paul, the Acts of Andrew and Matthias, the Acts of Peter and Andrew, the Consummation of Thomas the Apostle, the Book of Thomas the Contender, and the Gospel according to Peter. In the third book, I have put together all of the apocalypses for a study of the end time narrative, the last days scenario as applied to the fig tree generation, which even the book of Enoch, in the first chapter, he writes that he knows he's writing for a remote generation, one distant and into the future. And this particular book will help people to understand the end of days revelation, unlike any other book ever compiled, in my opinion. I have in this book the Apocalypse of Abraham, the apocalypse of Moses, the 14th vision of Daniel, the apocalypse of Elijah, the Hebrew apocalypse of Elijah, the 4th book of Ezra, the apocalypse of Shadrach, the sibling oracles, book 2, the apocalypse of Zephaniah, the apocalypse of Baruch, the apocalypse of Thomas, the apocalypse of Peter, the first apocalypse of James, the second apocalypse of James, the apocalypse of Paul, the revelation of St. John the theologian, the 10 signs, the apocalypse of Samuel, the apocalypse of Zerubbabel, and the vision of Adaman. And so, all these are, as I said, specific to our being the fig tree generation, the last generation. And so if you want to know more about the end times and where we are with regard to all that, I highly recommend the study of the Great Commission 3, the End Time Apocalypses, which you can find those books at sacredwordpublishing.com, which is, our website for the release of a lot of these extra biblical materials, which I'm not even sure if you knew that I was involved in this endeavor now, Robert. That's something that I've been doing since the last time we talked. But anyways, if you would speak about, just the even just all of these books on the different acts and apostles, and then we'll go into some of these specific teachings, like with regard to the serpent seed preexistence and the feminine Holy Spirit.
Okay, we'll look at that in a second. Let me go ahead and just kind of cap off what you're saying first off.
Sure.
Citing the book of Enoch, which again is spoken of explicitly in Jude, so it's definitely not something that can be ignored, even by I think you're more traditional Christians. They have to look at why it is that Jude is reading this book and why he's giving him the antiquity and the status that he's given him, the seventh from Adam, that he was a prophet because he was prophesying. So the book is prophecy. And like what you said, it says that it's not for this generation, but for a remote one, which is to come. And it says specifically concerning the elect. So there are people that are going to come at the end of time. And this book is for them. And one of the more interesting things, like you just cited an entire litany of books and sources that you just mentioned here. Just see how nicely this dovetails with chapters 104 and 105 of the book of Enoch. Because this book is for the end times, for the time of the removal of the wicked and the ungodly. And again, we are already in the third day. A day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years are as a day. We are figuratively, if you will, rising up ourselves as the church, and we are basically in the seventh day, if you will, as far as the 7 days of creation being 7,000 years, the millennium being the final quote unquote day, if you will, when that day dawns, if you will, and the morning star, which Jesus identifies himself in Revelation, I will give you the morning star. He's given you himself, in other words. Then the morning star rises in your hearts, right? So that's when we become the elect. That's when we begin to walk in the Spirit. The elect will begin to walk with the elect, and then we're going to have this movement. It will happen. And what he promises us, and I'll start from 104:10, the book of Enoch 104, starting at 10. And it says, "And now I know this mystery, that sinners will alter and pervert the words of righteousness in many ways, and will speak wicked words and lie, and practice great deceits, and write books according to their concerning their words." Now, just stop right there for a second and think about it. All that stuff that we were talking about earlier, how typically you won't find these extra canonical sources cross-referenced within your Bible. So first of all, there is that deception, that sort of subtle lie by omission, right? And so we can kind of check off that box. Yeah, that did happen. The words of righteousness or whatever, that there were lies that were spoken and great deceits. That being one of them. That these books aren't there. They're not spoken of as a great deceit. In other words. And it says, "But when they write down truthfully all of my words in their languages, and do not change or diminish aught from my words, but write them all down truthfully, all that I first testified concerning them," and then it goes on, "then I know another mystery, that books shall be given to the righteous and the wise to become a cause of joy and uprightness and much wisdom. And to them shall the books be given, and they shall believe in them and rejoice over them. And then shall all the righteous who have learnt therefrom all the paths of uprightness be recompensed. Okay, so all of this stuff that you're talking about, all of these books that have been withheld, books that some were cited, some of them we don't see references to exactly, but there are lots and lots and lots and lots of books that weren't ever canonized and weren't ever part of church tradition or whatnot. And so if we are the ones who are in the last generation who are there at the removal of the wicked and the ungodly, the seed, if you will, that we will be given these books. And then it goes on to further elaborate. It says, and in those days the Lord bade them, meaning the elect, to summon and testify to the children of the earth concerning their wisdom. Show it to them, for ye are their guides and a recompense over the whole earth. For I and my son will be united with them forever in the paths of uprightness in their lives, and they shall have peace. And the book basically concludes right there. There's a fragment that says, and rejoice ye children of uprightness, amen. So, I mean, that's basically how the book starts, saying it's for the end of the final generation, and basically how it ends, with that promise that books will be given to us and insights will be given to us, and that we will show the people of the world, what the truth is. And that's basically what we've discussed here so far.
Hold on, brother. We'll be right back for a second hour, everyone. But I agree with you. Welcome back, everybody, for second hour. I'm your host, Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed, and I have a special guest with me this evening, apocrypha 1970, Robert Farrell. And brother, I just want to thank you for, again, coming on with us. And I do agree with a lot of your assessment. And I also, and it's interesting that, especially for those of us that weren't brought up in Sunday school, or that, weren't, didn't have hardcore religious lives where we were forced to go to church every Sunday, and that when we decided to study and begin to research the scriptures, that we did it with new eyes and without any slant or bias. And in doing so, in my opinion, when you read and study the scriptures for yourself, and you don't have all of these other voices in your head telling you that this is how to interpret the text, or this is what you should get from the story, or how you should understand it, that you see it fresh and you see it without all of that organized mumbo jumbo leading you to a particular bias. And that's why it was that in reading and studying all of this material, I had so many themes that kept presenting themselves over and over to me. And in writing about that, especially with what happened in the garden, the pre-existence, how Christ knew us before the foundations of this world, how he said to Jeremiah, I have foreordained you to be a prophet unto the nations. I knew you before you ever went into the womb of your mother. These kind of things that, when reading that and understanding it, that I took it to mean things that are not talked about in Sunday school, and that are never covered in sermon, and that are never expounded upon by pastors, preachers, and ministers. And so others that were also intrigued by these kind of things and that wanted to understand and learn and know more about these concepts, we all began to create our own radio shows and discourse with one another. And myself, having been a book writer since I was 22 years of age, and compiling all this information and sharing and publishing it, that I've helped others, and others have helped me also to come to discernment that I am now largely criticized for, as I'm sure you are as well. and that the mainstream, basically considers those of us who believe certain way or have our own discernment about things as being heretical, because our beliefs they don't jive with what is taught in the Sunday school. Like, I don't at all believe that Eve ate an apple from some fruit tree somewhere, and that somehow that led to her becoming pregnant with Cain, who, being completely different than Adam, murdered his half brother Abel. I mean, and being left out of his genealogy, all these different kind of things, not found in the lineage of Christ. The mention of the enemy that snuck into the garden and that sowed the tares. I mean, all these things, they came to mean so much more to me, because I was able to even understand this one particular key, and it helped me to unlock so much of what was veiled in Scripture, and which a lot of people like myself now are coming to discernment upon. And so I just wanted to ask you about any particular themes that made presentation to you that you were able to quickly understand, which you are largely, attacked for or condemned now. Can you share?
You know what? I really have to say I very, very seldom am attacked that I know of. I usually don't pay it any mind when I am, because and I don't want to sound overconfident, but I know what I'm reading and I know what I'm seeing, and I can't be swayed from that. What they're teaching you is in effect a distortion. Now, I mean, I don't want to, there are probably a lot of well-meaning, well-intentioned people out there. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to paint these people all as devils or whatever. But, people that are under a delusion themselves, again, it's like the blind leading the blind.
Right.
Now, to me, there's a specific meaning there. The blind originally referred to the scribes, the Pharisees, and that tradition. And then the blind that they're basically leading are the Christian churches or whatever that follow in their footsteps of setting a canon, of following a priestly authority, and so on and so forth. Because they basically, by and large, kind of followed in the same patterns and footsteps of the Jewish leaders that came before them, and formed a church largely in the image that came before. And so, it was the kind of thing that seemed so plausible, I think, at the time, to the carnal mind, that this is just a different flavor, if you will, of Judaism, if you will, maybe, a little bit of icing on the cake, if you will, but not a complete and revolutionary departure, which is what it should have been. That there, and again, I don't want to open up a whole other can of worms, but there's this entire interpretational aspect to the scriptures, which, if you have the spiritual insight, you can begin to read between the lines on a lot of these things. Like one of the things that you spelled out just now, and I'm pretty sure that was the reference you were getting to, but in the Proto-Evangelion of James, for example, talking about the serpent seed. Let me see if I can find it here. It says, okay, when Joseph comes in and finds Mary pregnant, he comes in, and of course, he's upset. This is in the Proto-Evangelion of James, chapter 13. And it says that when she was in her 6th month, behold, Joseph came back from his building. He was building in Nazareth. And entered into his house, and he discovered that she was big with child. And he smote his face, threw himself on the ground upon sackcloth, and wept bitterly, saying, with what face shall I look upon the Lord my God? And what prayer shall I make about this maiden? Of course, thinking that she, obviously he had not, been with her. Right. So, he was obviously jumping to the, what any man would say, right. Really, what has happened? Right. So, and he says, because I received her a virgin out of the temple of the Lord, and I have not watched over her. Who is it that has hunted me down? Who has done this evil thing in my house and defiled the virgin? Has not the history of Adam been repeated in me? Right? So what's he saying? He's saying that, this isn't my seed. Right? It says, for just as Adam was in the hour of his singing praise, and the serpent came and found Eve alone, and completely deceived her, so that it happened to me also.
Right.
And so it goes on from there. But that's basically saying that Cain was not Adam's.
Right.
That's Joseph's belief. That's Joseph's statement in this book. And also just kind of another sort of witness in the New Testament to this, which some people, you might be able to explain it away as spiritual, because it is talking about a spiritual birth and becoming the spiritual son. But I think it's interesting to note that if you go to 1 John chapter 3,
Right.
what does it say? Let me see, where is it? Yeah, it says, okay, starting at 3:11, just for context, it says, "For this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil, and his brothers were righteous. And then marvel not, my brethren, if the world hate you." Okay, so in other words, the hallmark of being a true Christian is the world does hate you. And the reason why the world does hate you is because you don't think according to the rules of the world. Like the rules of the world, maybe by extension the rules of the churches. This is what we say. That's what we believe. That's it, and that's that. And it's based on their own authority, essentially. And so if you like even a Protestant, for example, and I have no denomination, so I'm not taking sides here, but just
Neither do I.
But a Protestant would argue sola scriptura. A lot of Protestants would say, look, my Bible is my authority, period. Now, for someone who's like that, again, it sort of begs the question, okay, so if the Bible is your authority, what about the fact that the Bible references things beyond itself? And what about the fact that the Bible itself doesn't say, hey, because God could have given us a list of books. Like, let's just say, for instance, that we had John or somebody else spell it all out for us, maybe in the book of Revelation or something. Okay, don't add or take away from these books. And by the way, these books are this, that. They could have gone on and named 66 or 70, whatever books. They could have named a certain number of books because, look, it's Bible is full of lists. The Bible is full of genealogies. The Bible is full of, he did this and he begat him and they begat them and they did this. You know what I'm saying? Just
right.
Full of stuff like that. So how hard would it have been for the early church to have compiled a canon if we were supposed to have followed a canon?
Right.
It couldn't have been that difficult, right? And especially looking towards the future, saying we really don't want people to get tripped up here. Let's spell it out for them. Let's put it out there Barney style for these people so they understand, right? The point is there never was a list. And right. It sort of implies that there was never meant to be a list. And why would that be? Because again, the world thinks according to certain rules that seem plausible, the fleshly mind finds palatable. And so what people do is they make sort of semi-arbitrary decisions based on, well, I don't like this teaching, or I don't like that doctrine, or, this is too much this or too much that, or we're not so sure about the origin of the book or something. So what the Bible has to do is it has to disabuse you of that illusion somehow so that you can get past it. Much of what we talked about, if you've been listening to us, it really does dispel that myth. If you even begin to have eyes that see and begin to have ears that hear, when you hear these extra biblical references, you have to kind of make a decision. Should I take the writer of this particular scripture, this particular verse, be it in Hebrews, be it in Jude, be it in James, whatever? Is this person citing this source, right? And if so, why does this person feel like this source is something that couldn't be cited? And so once you start to think about that, what does it actually do? If you actually transcend the canon, the notion, if you will, of the canon, based on that insight, then that insight has taken 2,000 years of church history and probably all of Jewish history in terms of priestly and the traditions, and swept it away. And so what are you left with? You're left with the ability to take the writer at his word. If it takes getting rid of this illusion in order to see what lies beyond that, then just that simple knowledge alone is revolutionary. Just that is enough to say, you know what, this entire foundation is nothing but sand. They didn't dig deep enough into the meaning here to get to the bedrock. And what is the bedrock? You know, let's see, who's our rock? You know, it's of course it's Christ. It's the foundation, if you will, of the scriptures, of the church, if you will. It has to be that. The thing is, these features are there, they do exist. And pretending that they're not there, either lying about it or pretending that they don't exist or whatever, creates a delusion, a very strong delusion that causes people to think something that isn't true. And so once you realize that what we're saying actually is true and what other people are saying isn't true, then you can kind of reach an epiphany, if you will, a certain kind of transcendence. You know, this is why what people say or they don't say kind of rolls off my back. You know, I can be wrong about a lot of things, but on a certain fundamental level, you know, they can't get me on that. You know, and so that gives me a little bit in terms of a certain kind of inner strength, if you will, a certain kind of inner knowing.
Yes.
This isn't me leaning onto my own understanding. I really want to underscore this. You know, people could say that, and that's fine. People are going to say what they're going to say, and I'm not too worried about it. You know, if you have a true heart, you know what I'm saying has some validity to it. And, you know, the fact that people, like I said, cover it up. It's just like it says in Enoch. There are people who will lie, and they practice great deceits and write books concerning their words, you know. But when they write down truthfully all of my words in their language and do not change or diminish aught from my words, but write them all truthfully, all that I testified concerning them, what happens? The next thing that happens is that I know another mystery. It says that books shall be given to the righteous and the wise to become a cause of joy and uprightness and much wisdom. And to them shall the books be given, and so on and so forth. Reveal it to them, the whole world, in other words, right? Which is exactly this. Exactly this.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
so we're there. I mean, that's the thing. We are there. We are in the final generation. We are there when the wicked and the godless sort of be removed. There is the serpent seed. You could probably speak way better to it than I have, because you know, I've been out to pasture for the last couple of years. But you know, but as far as all that's concerned, there is that serpent element that has been with us from the beginning. Something that tries to hide, something that tries to cover up. You know, be it spiritual, be it carnal. There is that, and it does exist, and it's demonstrable. And you know, as far as that's concerned, this is its greatest weakness. Because see, what does a person cover up if not their weakness? Why do they lie if the truth doesn't hurt them?
Right.
You know, so in other words, they have a very vested interest in lying. And again, I use that term. I don't mean to throw it around at like every person that's gone to seminary or whatever is a bad person. I don't really want to leave people with that impression. But unless and until they get to that point where they can let God be true and every man a liar. I mean, that's essentially what the end of chapter 104 is basically saying. Let God be true and every man a liar. I mean, if you wanted to sum it up, that's about it. You know, and when you get to that point, right, you do reach a certain level of transcendence, because now it's like, aha, you know, I'm not fooled anymore. Right? I've risen above that. So, I mean, to be honest with you, who's an honest person? A decent person doesn't want to see things actually as they are. You know, who wants to be deluded?
Right.
Who wants to be lied to? You know, it's nonsensical, right? But I think some people enjoy a nice, comfortable lie. It allows them to but if you're not that type of person, if you're what God calls the elect, right? The kind of person who hears the voice, right? Mm-hmm. Has ears to hear, let them hear, right? That's a command. That's a command. It's like saying, don't prevent them from hearing, you know, don't prevent them from seeing, right? Don't stand in their way. Allow them to hear, allow the children to come unto me. And again, children is another metaphor spelled out in the gospel of truth, for example, spelled out explicitly. that the children represent the elect.
Yes.
There's tons and tons of, it just goes around and around and around and around and around on itself. I mean, it really does. And that's the thing.
Right.
You just get into it. And that's the real revelation, is to understand that there is a third dispensation of the scriptures. What we just talked about. To them shall the scriptures be given. There is the dispensation to the Jews, which is the Old Testament, which is essentially the testament of the Father.
Right.
And then there is this second dispensation, which is the New Testament, if you will, which is the testament of the Son.
Yes.
And then, of course, there is talk of John, who is to come, Elijah, who is to come, and set all things right. So there's a future, like Elijah was, symbolically speaking anyway, John the Baptist was Elijah, in other words, right? It's mentioned in there that, that Elijah has already come, and that they did what they wished to do with him, and which was to cut off his head. And his head was the head of prophecy, as it speaks of in the secret book of James, of course. That's another story. But anyways, as far as that's concerned, Jesus speaks of Elijah in the future tense. Elijah does come. So who was John? John was the person who was the voice crying out in the wilderness. He was the one who was teaching the secret language. That was the thing. He was speaking it before Jesus ever came on the scene. And that's kind of important to take a mental note of that, because he spoke about the fact that he was this voice speaking, crying out in the wilderness, make you the way straight for the Lord. And he was using this secret language, which again is a whole other topic. But he was calling these people a generation of vipers, who warned you, and he was actually utilizing the language, which again that's a talk for another day. But
that word generation meaning offspring.
Well, but there will come the Spirit again a third time.
Right.
That the Spirit comes, the Comforter comes. And again, in Enoch, it talks about is for the final generation when the wicked and the godless are to be removed. And this is key, because I know a lot of very literal-minded people would say that that's for the flood. And it's easy to chalk it up to just that. But again, it's relevant for the future because it's alluded to in Jude. And again, this is the final removal of the wicked and the godless, which is not yet happened, because the wicked and the godless are still among us. They're still here. They're still misleading us. They're still selling greed and lust and deception. And then they're building their kingdoms here on the earth. And they're conspiring with one another and colluding with one another. In one way or another, they are kind of all in bed together, and they've all sort of taken the church and sort of divided it amongst themselves, each doing whatever they will with it, when there actually is an answer. And it's nothing that's been said before, because nothing that's been said before is pointing outside of the canon. This is the distinguishing factor. This is about referring to the original faith, the faith which was once delivered unto the saints, which was what? Well, one of the books he's citing is the Assumption of Moses. That was apparently one of the things that was once delivered unto the saints, according to Jude, because he cites it. And then also, of course, the book of Enoch cites that. Again, the seventh from Adam. He gives him his antiquity, prophesied. He gives him the status of a prophet. Of these men, or actually to these men. That's probably a more accurate translation. And if it's that, it means that these men, it's implied, should be listening to him, which they're not. And so to be honest with you, it's so in your face obvious. And again, this is how God works. It's astonishing that he can be this precise, simply because the devil. The only way for the devil to buy time is to create that illusion, the illusion of the canon, the illusion of the authority of men. That was done all the way down to the time of John the Baptist, and devil just went with it again. He saw that chance. It's like it worked before. Let's do this again. Let's create the canon again. Let's get rid of the teachings.
Mm.
Because again, like for example, in Luke it talks about the lawyers, or similarly in the Gospel of Thomas it talks about the scribes and the Pharisees
Right.
have taken the key of knowledge and have hidden it. They themselves have not gone in, and they themselves and they have not allowed those who wish to do so. So there was an active teaching against these keys. There was an active teaching against this knowledge, this entrance. It's you could say that it's a you could actually say that that's basically the entry into the kingdom, that's the tiny little gate. Because if you think about it, what does it do? That knowledge alone opens up a whole other world where the whole other testament can be introduced and understood on a higher level and on a higher plane and in an entirely different context, and absolutely sweeps everything out of the way. I mean, just absolutely dispenses with it.
Yes.
And once you transcend the canon, everything that they say is built on that. Sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I mean, it's critical to see this. It's gone. Their entire foundation is cut out. The axe has been laid at the root of their tree.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And it's gone. I mean, and so if you see that, if you get nothing else from this program, just that knowledge and that transcendence of that delusion that they've imparted to us, it was so liberating to me at the time. You know, and again, being the only person that I knew who had any of this knowledge, because I was all alone searching for these answers on my own or something, you can feel pretty lonely. You know?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But even at that, it's pretty cut and dried. You could run into problems. This is a problem that I would see. Is that people wouldn't know what to do with it once they had it. And again, that's what Enoch chapter 105 is about. It's about explaining it to people. So understand that the book should be given to you first, and that the teachings are coming, and that the understanding that is in these books will be given to the elect. And I think in some measure has been given to us. But, you know, again, it's always in the plural. There's lots of them. They will be here. They will be showing you these things. And they will all speak with the same understanding. Because again, like just what we're saying, the knowledge that the canon has been dispensed with puts us all in square one. We're all there who understand this and accept it. We're right there at square one saying, look, we're all on the same page together. We just swept away all of that, and we've got all these new books that we need to sort out and read and understand. And so that's when
Hold on, brother. All right, we'll be right back, everyone, for a final segment. All right, welcome back, everybody, for a final segment. I did want to really quickly state that I understand that for a lot of people who don't have time to even read the canonical material, that you should focus and certainly come to understand first the Bible, and then having a foundation, reach out. And certainly my foundation is based upon the canon. But in studying and learning and reading this other material, it has only deepened my clarity and brought me to understanding on concepts that had, in my opinion, been overlooked and misunderstood by the mainstream churches for what seems thousands of years now. And what had been widely embraced in common knowledge during the early formation of the church has now become lost and is considered to be heretical. For instance, knowledge that, which is one of the things that I've been attacked on lately, but that the Holy Spirit, wisdom, Sophia, is described as a feminine in the extra biblical as well as the canonical materials. And this is something that is lost knowledge, and that when you bring it up now, for some reason, people want to label you as Gnostic or tie you together with the Talmud or Kabbalah or whatever. And yet I don't study any of those teachings. I've read certain portions, but again, my focus is on the scriptures. And there's no need to even step outside of the canon to come to understanding on doctrines such as serpent seed, just like, the parable of the wheat and the tares in Matthew 13. I mean, you don't even have to leave Matthew chapter 13 and the words of Christ himself to understand that the Eve being beguiled, which means wholly seduced, that this is what happened, and that the enmity we see referenced in Genesis 3:15 between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, that is absolutely the beginning, that the eating fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, them losing their innocence, Eve losing her chastity, as referenced in 2 Corinthians 11, verses 2 and 3, as Paul states, that was the reason why they covered their genitals and hid from God in shame. They were embarrassed at what they had done, and this is the reason why Eve was, the consequences of her actions was that she was now going to bring forth children in sorrow and conception, and that there would be this enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, meaning that the seed of the serpent would have to appear from somewhere. And that is, in fact, what occurred in Genesis 4:1 with the bringing forth the heteropaternal superfecundation, the birth of the two fraternal twins from different fathers, Cain being a child of the serpent, as it says in 1 John 3:12, Cain, who was of that wicked one, the wicked one being referenced in Matthew as being the enemy that snuck into the garden, the devil that sowed them, sowed the tares, that he is Satan, the serpent, the Nakash of Genesis chapter 3, referenced in the Targum as Samael. I mean, all these things are so easily understood once you just open your mind and embrace new possibility. But for people, this is something that I've learned recently, is that, people are not really interested in truth. They are more interested in only learning about or supporting what they already believe to be truth. And so, and in most instances, it is very difficult for them to embrace new paradigm or to shift to accept new reality. Just like with what occurred on 9/11 and how all of us were forced to embrace that, there's government sponsored terror and there's things that going on behind the scenes. And again, this is, the seed of the serpent, the synagogue of Satan, that is doing these kind of things, that as long as we don't understand who our enemy is, and that there is this ongoing war, this enmity between these two seed lines, and that it would continue. Christ said in the parable of the kingdom, let both grow together until the time of the end. And at the time of the end, he will send forth his reapers, the angels, to gather the tares for burning and the wheat for preservation. And that is what we are contending with, that we do not wrestle against just flesh and blood, which are the progeny, the children of the devil, where it says the generation of vipers, again, that word generation means offspring, and where it says the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, that word seed is the Hebrew word zerah, and it means descendants, children, progeny. And so we are speaking about a literal war between bloodlines, which is why we see in the world today a propagation of evil and the perpetuation of it in manner that if we are all one people and we're all loving and compassionate and innocent like Adam and Eve, then from whence does all of this evil, why is it still with us, and why haven't we grown past it? And where is its origin from to begin with? And why in John chapter 8 does Christ allude to the murderers of the prophets as being the killers of the patriarchs, being from that bloodline which killed Abel to Zacharias? And Abel, we know he was murdered by Cain. And so how do you dismiss that there is a bloodline that has killed the prophets and that practices assassination and that continues even up into the day of Christ, murdering his cousin John the Baptist, who was the rightful high priest, his father being the high priest Zacharias that was killed in the Holy of Holies. I mean, if you can't put all these things together and understand, I mean, he tells you after the multitudes are sent away and the apostles come up to him and ask him to explain to us the parable of the tares of the field, he tells them that the devil is the enemy which sowed the tares. I mean, it doesn't get any clearer than that. And so, but again, people have such difficulty getting past their bias and their indoctrination that they are just simply not able to embrace new possibility. And because of that, they remain firmly entrenched in their deceptions, and very few, like in the Matrix movies, very few are able to unplug from the Matrix. And so that's where we are with world. And that's why the elect is but a few. It says in the Gospel of Thomas, I will call you one from 1,000, two from 10,000. The elect is but a very few. Robert?
Yeah, and one will chase 1,000, and two will chase 10,000. It's interesting that when you read in like the book of Revelation, 22:15 talks about those who are in and those who are out. It says, "For without," meaning the kingdom, who don't enter into the gates of the city. And again, you have to enter in through the gates. If you try to enter in through some other way, the same as a thief and a robber. And it says, "For without are the dogs, the sorcerers, the whoremongers, murderers, and idolaters, and whoever loveth and maketh a lie." Now, the thing about it is, for these people to exist and to persist, they, first of all, just go down the list. Idolatry, whoremongering, if you will, sorcery, murder, and loving and making of a lie. If you want to think about it as a whole collective, Babylon, if you will, the entire world system operates consistently kind of in the same manner from beginning to end. You were talking about the serpent of old in chapter 20 being the devil, one and the same with the devil, which is laid out in chapter 20, verse 2. Is Satan, is the dragon, is the serpent, etc. He's been, it's all one big thing, and his children do his will, or it could be said that those who do his will are his children, just as it says in 1 John. If you do what is right, you are a son of God. So I mean, it is a spiritual connection, but there's also that issue of the seed, the genetic component. There's something about these people. Something about them is different, kind of like the wheat and the tares. They bear a superficial resemblance to you, but they can't allow for the truth to be told. They can't allow for people to get away from the lies and from murder and all that. They want to keep us trapped. They want to keep us fooled, because, like it says, they're a legion. They are everywhere, but they control through. And like, I don't like to bring up current events, but since you mention it, there's a whole lot going on in the world right now, where the world is just becoming aware of just how deep this wickedness goes. And there literally is no end to it. You can't point to some place and say, hey, it started here or it started there. There have always been people on this earth, and people behind the scenes, who controlled events, great people that you never hear about at all, even, or hardly ever, are usually the ones pulling the strings. They're so far in the background, they're so deeply hidden, and yet they somehow manage to control the entire world through very dark means, sometimes through blackmail, sometimes through bribery, sometimes through, fear. But they used these dark arts in order to run society, civilization. That the world without God is ruled by the God of this world. And the God of this world has his own ministers, his own people to do his will and to carry out his will. This is a mystery of iniquity. And the world is becoming more and more aware of it because, again, things are going from the paradigm of the top down to the bottom up. And again, Enoch is for that kind of a situation where the elect have the ear, if you will, of the whole world. I mean, why does it say, summon and testify to the children of the earth concerning your wisdom, right? Because you basically are at a time when you have the ear of the entire world, coupled with the wisdom, coupled with the books, this is his Achilles heel. And the devil is not 10 feet tall, so to speak. I mean, you speak the truth to him, he's truly fearful of it. If you resist him, it says that he'll flee from you, in fear even. That the devils, that they believe in God and they tremble. So they do have a weakness. They can be overcome. If their strength is in their lie, what happens when they don't have that lie anymore? If their strength, you see, and so the devil cannot cast out the devil. Satan cannot cast out Satan, right? So what do we have to do? We have to step up and use the tools that God gave us. And his word is enough to do it. Like I said before, just what I told you. If you never read the book of Enoch, if you never read any of these books, and I'm not suggesting you don't read them, but I mean, if you're this kind of skeptic who says, I'm not going to touch that stuff, just think about it like this. Why don't you just look at what you have and believe what you have? How about that? Why don't you look at Jude, and ask yourself, why is he referencing this book? And saying, ask yourself, do you at least believe him? Because you reach this inescapable conclusion that either you do or you don't. But if you do believe him, then how can you believe differently from him? How can you justify that? And if you don't believe him, well, this really isn't your conversation, but I'll put it this way. Even if you don't believe, like let's say you were a total atheist or a total skeptic or belong to some other religion or something, look at the logic here. You have a dispensation that is claimed to be from God, right? Which has spoken of things in prospect for at least 2,000 years, right? And so even if you say this is the word of man and you're a total skeptic and everything, how is it that here at the end of this 2,000 years, it says that we'll be given books, and here's a mechanism for it.
Right.
And it's right there in the scriptures you have. How did it turn out to be right then?
Absolutely.
How did it turn out that it happened? I mean, ask yourself that. If you're a total skeptic, I should be able to collect. Somebody call the amazing Randy. Okay, I mean, because I want my $1 million. This honestly is proof that God exists.
Right.
And this honestly is. And that's the real takeaway here. Whether you believe these books or not, whether you trust these books or not, the fact is they were read. The fact is that they were believed. The fact is that they were spoken of. And the fact is that you were lied to about it.
Right. And the other thing, since we're speaking about prophecy, is that, 1/3, if not more, of the scripture was written for our generation with regard to those prophecies that are yet remaining to be fulfilled. And we are seeing those things now coming to light. Even Christ spoke about in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 about the blooming of the fig tree. And then when you go to the Apocalypse of Peter, which was one of those gospels that was left out, and Peter was one of the main, if not the main prophet unto the Jews. Certainly Paul was chosen for the Gentiles, but Peter was one of the apostles which was the church was founded upon. And his apocalypse being left out of the canon, it gives you clarity that the fig tree is the regathering of the nation of Israel. And that occurred in our well, our generation, not my lifetime, I wasn't yet born, but those of us that are alive now, this happened during our generation. And it says in the scriptures that the generation that saw the blooming of the fig tree and the fig tree putting forth its tender shoot, that this would be the generation which saw the fulfillment of all things, and that we would be witness to the return of Christ. And so, since that time, 1947, around then, look at how everything has accelerated. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. We have the Nag Hammadi codices being discovered around that time. Israel, the Zechariah 12, is Jerusalem becoming a cup of trembling amongst the nations, that the Palestinian, the Muslim, and Zionist Jews conflict since that time, the 6 Days War, all of that is still ongoing, and even now is being prophetically fulfilled with the United States now recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, how we're moving our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and how that is also, igniting the Zechariah 12 prophecy, the whole thing of Damascus becoming a ruinous heap. All of that is occurring right now as well in our lifetime. We are seeing the fulfillment of so many things. Even the whole prophecy given unto Daniel, the statue, the 10 toes, the clay and the iron, all that, the 10 confederation of the regions of the New World Order, that is also being played out. And so, all these things are unfolding in our lifetimes, which, the fact that the word is prophetic and that it confirms itself and that it has been 100% accurate, that in and of itself should convict everybody that it is the inspired word of the Most High God. And it's not just the canonical materials, because as I said, even in that book that I put together, the Great Commission 3 on the end time apocalypses, all of that fits right along with Revelation, and all of it is being fulfilled in the same manner and details all the prophecies that are also laid out in the latter portions of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. I mean, it's all coming to light now.
Yeah, I agree. It's well, I mean, there's going to come a point where the lie can no longer be maintained, and that day is approaching quickly. And we've seen, you mentioned current events. I mean, how long does it take for the world to change? It can change in a day. It can change in a morning.
Right.
The way that things are in this world is rather instantaneous these days, and so, to be honest with you, it's no great shakes. We could be totally in another paradigm in a twinkling of an eye if we all somehow got on the same page at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That is really literally how fragile and how vulnerable this world system is, and this knowledge, this understanding, really is a revelation, and it actually gives you the ability to literally cut off the head of that dragon and put it to rest, put it to death. I mean, it literally gives you that power, and the devil knows it. There is a world of silence out there. The silence, they say proverbially, is just deafening with regard to this stuff.
Right.
And that to me is a sign that the devil really fears it, that his kingdom is vulnerable to it.
Right.
And I can see why.
Yeah. It's because, again, once you unlock from the matrix, and you can see from the outside in, and you see that everybody is being indoctrinated into lies and deceit, and that, everybody's buying into the whole 9 to 5, the American dream, materialism, all that. And all of that whole dream is being fractured. This generation is no longer buying into that. But that's another topic for another show. We've got 4 minutes remaining, brother. I want to give you a chance to give out all of your website information, where people can go to find your book, The Super Gospel, where they can go to hear your readings, and then we'll end with final comment.
Okay, well, like I said at the beginning of the episode, I'm on YouTube. It's Apocryphile 1970. That's APOCRYPHILE 1970. And if you want to go to my website, where there's tons of PDFs, all kinds of little treatises that I wrote, all kinds of books, apocryphal and canonical and otherwise, that are there for you to read at that site, all kinds of links to videos and stuff, and that's at scriptural-truth.com. And also, if you want to get my book, it's available through Amazon and also through another publisher, again, Fifth Estate Publishing. You can go there. You can find it there. But the book is also available for download at scriptural-truth.com. I never force anybody to buy it. It's there for you to read. If you want to support it, that's great. It's not a money-making endeavor for me. This is just me, my own personal research, letting it out there, letting the world see it. So it's there for you if you want it.
Well, once more, I do recommend that people read it. I think it will give you insight into the life of Yeshua, the life of Mary, the infancy, the early childhood. And also, I just released a book about this as well, and it's not in linear frame like yours, like you have quotations, which are all compiled in a direct timeline, but I have all of the different books and manuscripts and texts that most people don't know about that are focused on the life of Mary and Christ as the early childhood and the infancy. And I released that as a text as well. It's called Yahushua Christ, the Infancy, Childhood, and Lost Years. And again, for people that are interested, you can find that at www.sacredwordpublishing.net. Also, I just released the 2018 ancient Enochian lunar calendar for those that are interested in understanding how Kadesh determines Sabbath and the Levitical feast days. You can find that there as well. Hey, brother, we appreciate you so very much, and definitely we'll have you on again. Look forward. We didn't even get to cover some of the topics that I wanted to do, so we'll do that in a follow-up show. We got 1 minute remaining, but I'll give you a final comment.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure to be on the show. I've been away for a while doing my own thing, but I think things are happening in this world, and things are changing. Paradigms are shifting, and it's all part of the same thing. I think it's all part of a great revolution that's happening in the world of the spirit and in the world of the flesh. Things are going down, as they say. More than happy to be a part of it. More than happy to see it happen. I think it's going to be momentous, and scary as it may seem, I think everything's going to end up just fine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be some trying times, but as long as you are in the wing of protection of the Most High God, there's nothing to fear. It's all good. We're protected everywhere. Go ahead, brother.
He's going to appoint angels, it says in the book of Enoch, to guard us as the pupil of his eye.
Absolutely. And that's what it is. So
just about, yeah.
Yeah. I used to be worried about getting out of America and all that, but no longer. Wherever, whenever, whenever. So
God bless.
God bless you too. God bless all. Good night. Shalom.